Hey everyone, Django Fett here, Honey Down Games, comics, TV shows, movies, and more. Continuing my Tales reviews is Tales Volume 3, which contains Tales number 9 through 12. And this came out back in February 2003. This may be my last Tales video, but it depends on viewership and your comments below. So I'll try to be really brief as I discuss each story as much as I can and really go in depth with stories I enjoyed without spoiling too much, but no guarantees. Once you get me talking about some good Star Wars Legend stories, I can never stop. Also, the stories that I didn't enjoy, I will mention, but I will just gloss over. This volume may be my favorite yet, as it contains some of the best and epic stories ever, so I'll be glazing the hell out of this volume. Also, this may be the first Star Wars graphic novel that I actually ever bought and still have in rough condition. I used to reread it all the time and always loved it. Let's get this started with Tales number 9, with only 3 stories in total, which seems to be too few, but one of the stories is quite lengthy and worthy of that alone. The first story is called Resurrection, which is written by Ron Marz and drawn by Rick Leonardi, and this is one of the best stories, period. This is the encounter between Darth Vader and Darth Maul, as you can tell by the cover, set 0 BBY, and Vader is sent to Kalakar 6 to intercept rebels, but it's actually a false message sent by the prophets of the dark side in order to lure him to fight a resurrected Darth Maul, so he can be killed, and Maul can replace Vader at the Emperor's side without the Emperor's consent, as they see Vader as weak and having a spark of light still inside of him. Maul and Vader then fight in an epic fashion and extremely close for the most part, as you can expect those two titans to be, who are experts in lightsaber combat, of course. And eventually Vader wins by the grit of his teeth by literally stabbing himself to kill Maul, and Maul asks, "What could you hate to destroy me?" And Vader remarks, "Myself." One of the best fucking lines I have ever seen, ever. The Emperor then appears and kills the prophets and tells him to stop the rebels with the stolen plans, and Vader follows his master and the story ends. This is truly top 5 one of my favorite Legend stories ever. It's that fucking good. If you want to read one of the most epic stories ever, read this ASAP, and especially if you want to get into the EU. This is a great starting point, then it will make you explore all the different stories within the EU. There's a few behind the scenes on Star Wars Wiki I found interesting about this story. So the story was originally planned to be presented as a 4-part miniseries, however it was reduced when it was decided the story would appear in Star Wars Tales, which I think could have been really fascinating, but they somehow made it work as a short 1-issue story practically. There are references to the Prophets of the Dark Side being on Dromund Kalakar, or Dromund Kaas I think, in part 5 of the Dark Forces saga, which I must have forgotten, but there was even a reference to them at all. Resurrection was selected as one of Star Wars Insider issue number 83, 20 most memorable moments of the expanded universe, and including on the list are Exar Kun Gives in the Dark Side, Redemption of Ulic, The Emperor Reborn, and many others as you can see here. Also, there were some goofy moments like Ewoks on Ice, which I had no freaking clue that was even a thing, which I wouldn't actually mind seeing myself now. Hate Leads to Lollipops is a silly story with young Darth Maul going around causing destruction and meeting Palpatine. It's non-canon of course, but a funny story. The Rebel 4 is an extremely short 4-page comic story that is written and drawn by Jay Stevens, and is homage to the old school 60s comics and meant as a parody of the Fantastic Four comics, with Darth Vader looking just like Dr. Doom. Next, we are going into Tales number 10, which contains 5 stories, and we can talk about the next big story that I will go in depth with, and I really enjoyed, is Trooper. This is written by Garth Ennis, and drawn by John McCrea. Now, if you know Garth Ennis, or Ennis, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, I'll just say whatever, or never even heard of him, he is known for his mature works, such as Punisher, The Boys, and Preacher, and knows how to do it. I've read all those comics and pretty much familiar with his writing style and his amazing works. So this story focuses on a certain stormtrooper in the Empire set 0 BBY that would be relevant to episode 4. And this would explain the intense training and battles that this certain stormtrooper went through and willingly went along with it. He had a boring, simple life, but he wanted more and set out to become a horrible being as a stormtrooper, and you see these horrors firsthand. This is the first time I've ever seen Star Wars go in a mature direction that I would never see replicated again. The closest is the Battle of Jabim and the Dark Horse's Clone Wars arcs, or some of the Boba Fett comics, but not to this extent, where you see such brutality take place. I would love to see Disney Star Wars make a show on the mature take with Stormtroopers, or something within that universe, but they have been creatively bankrupt for a while now, and they always want to go in a child-friendly and family-friendly direction for a while now, so they'll never risk it and do that at all, which is a shame. I don't want to reveal anything more about this story, but this is a great story, and it has a fantastic ending. Unfortunately, this story is non-canon, as confirmed by Leland Chi on Facebook page. I really don't know why that's the case, but okay. Screech is written by Mike Kennedy and drawn by Francisco Ruiz Velasco, set in 4 ABY, and details the story of Temptel Screech, who finds his belongings are gone from Tatooine and finds Lando stole his gear. I first thought this guy was a weird-looking Lando, but towards the end you find he encounters Lando, and it's not clear if it's canon or not. I thought it was just a silly take on Lando, taking this weird guy's gear. Nameless is written by Christian Reed and drawn by Chris Lane, and tells the backstory of how Darth Maul makes his double-bladed lightsaber, and yes, it's Legends. A Wookiee Scorned is next, and written by Jason Hall and drawn by Christina Chan. This is set 4 ABY, and is centered around the Chewbacca feeling scorned after the events of Return of the Jedi and feeling like a bad third wheel to Han and Leia, who are just romantically involved. And the first thing that draws me is the anime-inspired art, and it's really my first time seeing Star Wars in an anime style, and I loved it. And the story was funny too, making fun of the relationship between Luke and Leia before finding out they're brother and sister as well. And lastly from the issue is Free Memory, which is written by Brett Matthews and drawn by Vache Mevlian. C-3PO is looking for R2-D2 who needs to be serviced and finds past records of Leia, Han, and Luke. And after giving further thought, C-3PO decides to do the unthinkable and decides that R2-D2 doesn't need to be serviced. This was just the first time I ever saw that I really saw C-3PO have a sweet moment with R2. Keep those memorable recordings instead of just removing it all from his memory. It just really showed some humanity and heart to C-3PO because he had great moments and memories with those characters, and he doesn't want to easily forgo those moments too. So I liked that quite a bit. Moving on to issue number 11, we have 5 stories in total, with the first being Prey. This was written and drawn by Kia Asamiya. This is set 5 BBY and has the anime style too, but not very good like the Wookiee story in my opinion. So in this one, Tarkin hires Boba Fett to track down Han Solo, but Vader doesn't like it and prefers to do it himself, and they eventually cross paths, Boba Fett and Vader, and duke it out, and Solo gets away. I didn't realize that Han had a bounty, and even Tarkin wanted him before the events of A New Hope, so that one I didn't really understand, but it was still a decent story. In the Beginning is written by Garth Ennis, once again, and is not remotely as dark as Trooper, and not dark in general. So in this one, a young Lando loses his ship in a gambling match against some mysterious characters, and I guess you should know who they are, and would lose in the end. This was just a short story, just focused on that gambling match, and doesn't go any further, so it's just really short. The Princess Leia Diaries, written by Jason Hall, follows Princess Leia as a young girl to her transformation to a rebel leader. And you see it right away how she just hates high society and see the seeds of rebellion and their defiance to Tark, and it's better than anything the Kenobi show will do. So yeah, this is infinitely better than that, but it's still a good story too. Tall Tales, written by Scott Alley, and stars 5 patrons playing cards as they share stories about their own takes of the original trilogy, and they're all different, and it's essentially the Rashomon effect. So Rashomon is an Akira Kurosawa movie. Essentially, this is where the first ever telling of this different stories of these certain events would take place, but they would all be different, and they would all be wrong. That's what I call the Rashomon effect. So if you guys can look out for my review, I will be reviewing that one in particular. A really great movie. And you guys will know what I mean when I talk about that one more in depth later on. Everyone tells their own stories with some aspects of the truth, but it's mostly false. It's like they heard the events and had their own made-up takes. Ghost is the last story in this issue and is written and drawn by Jan Duursema, so I gotta love this one. It involves a young Han Solo looking for treasure until he encounters none other than Quinlan Vos on the run from bounty hunters. The treasure ends up as Quinlan's lightsaber, and Quinlan kills the bounty hunters and makes Solo forget the whole encounter. I would guess this story is sometime after the events of episode 3, with Voss trying to hide, but running into bounty hunters along the way. But it could be before the Clone Wars. It's not really clear to me, and there's no year that I'm seeing that it's set in. If someone can let me know in the comments when this is set in, that would be great. And lastly, let's get into Tales number 12, and this contains 5 stories in total, including a story from a free comic book day issue in 2002. Back when they had those, and this story was called A Jedi's Weapon. This comic also features an illustration by the legendary Suneo Sanada, who did an epic drawing called Showdown. He has done a tremendous amount of work with the Star Wars back in the day with just incredible artwork, so I recommend you check out his artwork if you can. I do have one of his artworks in my background, so it's freaking fantastic artist. I'm just not sure why this little art illustration was included, but I thought it was cool nonetheless. We will start with A Day in the Life, written by Brett Matthews and drawn by Adrian Sabar, and the story is set for ABY and 3 days after the Battle of Endor, with Wedge leading a small patrol of X-Wing fighters and running into a nest of TIE fighters and losing one of their pilots. It's a good story, however, there is a contradiction error with this one. The story is stated to take place 3 days after the Battle of Endor, in which Wedge Antilles is in command to Rogue Squadron, and Luke and Skywalker are still stationed with the Alliance fleet in orbit above Endor. The time frame is in direct contradiction with the events taking place in the novel The Truce at Bakura, in which Skywalker, Antilles, and Rogue Squadron depart from Endor 2 days after the battle there to assist Imperial forces on the planet Bakura. The novel reveals that it would take days to travel from Endor to Bakura, thus it stands that Skywalker, Antilles, and Rogue Squadron are in hyperspace transit 3 days after the Battle of Endor. I would like to consider it legends, but since there is that contradiction between A Truce at Bakura, this is non-canon, unfortunately. Now we can get into A Jedi's Weapon, written by Henry Gilroy. This centers around Obi-Wan Kenobi and his Padawan Anakin on a diplomatic mission in Coruscant, and Anakin learns a valuable lesson to never lose his lightsaber. Or does he? We see how much that takes to effect in episode 2, that is. The Revenge of Tag and Bink, written by Kevin Rubio and drawn this time by Rick Zombo. So the artwork is radically different, as you can see, than we're accustomed to. But after the success of Tag and Bink, Kevin Rubio did a continuation of sorts with this comic. This would end up being retconned and considered apocryphal in the Tag and Bink continuity, as we would later get the amazing The Return of Tag and Bink comic. Essentially, this comic was like the first draft of The Return of Tag and Bink, as there are a ton of similarities between the two. And it's funny, but it's nowhere near as funny as the later, the Return of Tag and Bink and the first story. Those are incredible. They're so freaking hilarious. Once Bitten is the next story, written by C.B. Sabluski and drawn by Makoto Nagatsuka, and Obi-Wan tells his story to Han of his encounter with Aurora Singh. I really like the artwork here, and it really showed how a young and inexperienced Obi-Wan was very similar to Anakin as a Padawan, running headlong to danger without thinking. Aurora ends up running away after nearly beating both him and Qui-Gon. The Duty is the last story, and it's written by Christian Reed and drawn by John McCree, and this is set right after Episode 3 during the Jedi Purge. A Jedi named Jira gives it his all to defend Padawans from an Imperial attack and encounters Darth Vader. Vader beats him down, no problem, and wants Jira to give in to the dark side, and he refuses at first, and eventually he relents after the Padawans are threatened. Vader then betrays him and has some interesting lines and leaves him and Jira, who failed in his duty to protect and betrayed everyone, to the dark side. A really good story with a great ending, but not so much for that Jedi. Overall, you got some great stories with incredibly memorable ones like Resurrection and Trooper that easily steal the show. There are a few forgettable ones like Prey and A Jedi's Weapon, but some odd ones like Revenge of Tag and Bink or Screech, which are interesting reads at the very least. So I have to give Star Wars Tales Volume 3 a... I cannot recommend this Tales volume enough, and you can go out and buy this or the issues at the very least to read these incredible stories for yourself. You will be satisfied. If you love the EU, you want to get into some great Star Wars stories too, look no further than here. Overall, I think this is probably my favorite Tales volume ever, and I don't know how it compares with 4, 5, and 6. I barely remember those at this point. I have to reread those to compare it. But I think nothing compares to this. I mean, there's just so many great fucking stories. I mean, the Darth Maul and Vader storyline alone was so fucking great. But let me know your favorite story from here in the comment section below. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comment section. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, Django Fett. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace.